to another edition of the Silverbird Selection, and today it's a review comparison video. So I'm comparing my review scores from a recent batch of games I've reviewed with those from Zap64 back in the 80s and also the users of Lemon64. Now ordinarily I would review a batch of 10 games, but on this occasion it's just going to be 8, and the reason for that is that I've only got another 8 games left to review in the next batch, so this seemed the perfect point to make the break, shall we say. So let's head over to my computer and take a look at those reviews and compare them to Zap and Lemon.
Here we go then. This should be a familiar sight for anyone who's watched any of these game review comparison videos in the past. Here's my list of games in Excel from my collection, filtered down to just the games for this particular episode. So as I've mentioned, there's only 8 in this one rather than the usual 10, and most of these I went through in my run through the alphabet in reverse alphabetical order, which means that graphic editor was first, working through to Antyriad. I then reviewed 1, 2, 3 and finally Mission Genocide. Bit of a mixed bag here. We've got some games that have got quite high scores and some that have got not so good scores. We've also got a game that isn't a game at all, it's actually a utility, and that's graphic editor, and that's what I reviewed first. But as you might expect, that's not covered on Lemon64 or in Zap, so there's going to be no comparison there at all. Basically I gave it 4.6 and nobody else reviewed it at all. Can't find any other magazine reviews anywhere for it or anything like that. So let's move on to the next game I reviewed, which was a game, and that was Force 1. So as usual, we'll head over to Lemon64 and take a look at that game. So I gave Force 1 a score of 5.3, not one of the better games in this particular batch. In fact, I think it was the worst. And Lemon users are even less complimentary because they gave it a score of 3.7 from 18 votes. Just a few comments here, let's quickly have a look through those. Lost this game and became convinced it was the best shoot 'em up ever. Found it a couple of years ago and loaded up to find it wasn't very good at all. Never heard of it in the C64 days, tried it today and it just sucks monkey balls. No atmosphere, no weapons, crap graphics, crap sound, pointlessness. Difficult, this was dead easy. Oh, that's referring to someone else's comment presumably. Possibly the worst game it was ever my misfortune to own. Utter rubbish, extremely poor Delta ripoff, an utter pile of shite. An incredibly weak horizontal shoot 'em up, subpar graphics, no scrolling, poor sound, and the difficulty is right through the roof. So yeah, pretty much universally not enjoyed by the Lemon users, and I would agree with those comments. Let's go over and have a look at what Zap thought of it. And they reviewed it in issue 28, August 1987, half-page review in the budget section. And as you can see, they weren't very impressed either. Julian Rignall does not look happy, and they gave it an overall score of 48%, 72 for presentation, 51 for graphics, 23 for sound, hookability 58 and lastability 43. Though slightly tedious, it's challenging enough to keep a fan of mindless shoot 'em ups amused for a short while. I'm not sure I'd even agree with that. The shoot 'em up reduced to its simplest form, they said. So let's take a quick look at the reviewer comments. The first one here saying, although a complete rip-off of every horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up known to man, and a pretty bland one at that, Force 1 is in fact quite playable. Not sure I agree with that. It wasn't particularly playable. I mean, it was functionally playable, but it wasn't much fun. The attacking alien ships are quite smart. Some of the wave formations are pretty devious as well. One major gripe is that once an alien vessel has bit the dust, the remaining dust can bite back. Running into a cloud of vapour proves fatal. Yeah, I remember making that observation as well, and very annoying. Although it does become part of the game apparently, and easily overcome by some nifty flying. But really, you shouldn't have to avoid an explosion, I don't think. That was just bad programming. Force 1 isn't exactly state of the art in C64 programming, but it kept me amused for a while. And Julian Rignall I don't think was as impressed as that. Shoot 'em ups don't come any simpler than this, and Force 1 is basically a variant on the first level of Sanction. Aliens whiz in from the right, you shoot them and that's it. No extra weapons, no motherships, no bonus screens, just waves and waves of alien ships which keep on coming until you die. The graphics are quite pretty, but there's little else of note. Yep, couldn't agree more with that. Again, 48%, probably even a little bit too good a score I would say, even though my score of 5.3 was a little bit more than that. Let's move on now then to the next game I reviewed, which was Dynamite Dan. This was a Silverbird re-release of a Mirrorsoft game, which you can see here. There's the original cover of it in case you're interested. And Dynamite Dan received a score of 7.4 from Lemon users from 35 votes. But I didn't rate it quite that highly, I gave it a score of 6.3. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Could never get very far when I was younger, usually a stick or two of Dynamite. Awesome game with great music. This game is a good example of a game which thrives to play again and again despite the high level of difficulty. It's as good as the Spectrum version. That's not exactly high praise. Seems to be a port from the Spectrum. It's missing the wonderful bleeper sound and music found in the Spectrum version. So for some reason somebody thinks Spectrum sounds better than Commodore 64, which is a bit strange. Another great game we used to play for hours back in the day. I still like it, though it's a bit too difficult. Always puts me in mind of Christmas, this one, as me and my brother played it quite a bit around this time one year. Could never get all the dynamite, usually ended up in the water. Fond memories. Fun but difficult game. Managed to complete it 2 or 3 times. Well done, Greg. Moving on. Another pile of crap, boring and very cheaply made. Not everyone liked it, it seems. Great game, says somebody else there. Jonas Lindberg. Hardest game in history but enjoyable as well. A difficult platform game, very like Jet Set Willy. I agree with that. Like Willy, it's nearly impossible to complete but highly addictive. Excellent but difficult open-ended platform game that will keep you occupied for a long time. If you like Jet Set Willy, you'd love it. Well, I didn't like Jet Set Willy, and maybe that's why I didn't like it that much. Spectrum-esque but strangely compelling platformer. High unavoidable death rate may lead to frustration though. I like that one. That's from Les Dawson's Love Child. So let's move on to the ZZap review, and there's a couple of reviews in ZZap. Let's look at the original one first. So this is quite an early one from January 1986, black and white throughout, and they gave it 80%, saying it's one of this year's more impressive platform games. Good scores for presentation, graphics, sound fairly average, hookability, lastability and value for money all pretty good. It says cheaper and better than a lot of Commodore software. How much was it? $7.95 originally. So let's move on to the reviewer comments. And the first one here says, they're enjoying this game greatly on the Spectrum. I'm not as impressed with this Commodore version. The graphics are the same as those of the original and very impressive they are too. Fair enough, I suppose. But I know it may seem hard to believe, but the sound on the Spectrum version is better. That's the second person to have said that. That's bizarre. Maybe I need to listen to the Spectrum version. Dynamite Dan is as similar to play as any other platform game, although there are some nice aspects, even original ones, that are very effective. Trampolines and Underground River are 2 of many such ideas. The price is reasonable, but all in all this is really just another platform game with a few nice touches. Second reviewer comment here says, I've only ever seen and heard Dynamite Dan on the Spectrum a couple of times and always thought that the graphics and music were quite smart, especially the latter. The game, I confess, didn't look particularly outstanding to play, and it wasn't until I played this conversion that my opinion changed somewhat. Graphics on sound aren't as good, and they're quite miffed that the music is worse on the C64 version, so clearly the Spectrum version did have good music. Gameplay is certainly good, better than they thought. There's some very nice touches throughout, pretty much saying the same thing as the first one there. So I'll move on to the third one, which is good old Julian Rignall. When this game first appeared on the Spectrum, everyone in Crash went ape. I personally couldn't blame them. It's a superlative Jet Set Willy style arcade adventure, colourful, fun, great to play, converted faithfully to Commodore 64, hasn't lost any of its original charm and humour. Sound is a bit disappointing though, once again. The graphics are bright, colourful and on most occasions well animated. Plenty of new novel content that should bring even the most lethargic of platformites back to their joysticks or keyboards. Okay, well they're pretty complimentary there. Gave it a score of 80%, as I said. I also mentioned that this game did get another review for the budget version in a later edition of ZZap. So let's quickly take a look at that. This is from issue 44 in 1988, and you can see quite clearly there's a whole bunch of Silverbird re-releases featured here. Cauldron 2, we've seen this page before in fact, because we've also got Fighter Pilot on there, and then 2 games in the middle that are going to be featured in this video. Firstly Dynamite Dan, and later we'll be getting back to the Sacred Armour of Antyriad. So just a small review here of the 199 release, given 79%, so just 1% less than the original score, and it basically says it's not a bad little game, though graphics and sound are a bit dated now. Platforming fans should lap it up, and there's a little screenshot there as well. So that was a review of the Silverbird re-release, and that's the score I'm going to be using from this point onwards, the 79%. Moving on then, next up is Combat Crazy, also known as Warbringer. I give this a score of 8.2, and as you can see, Lemon users in very close agreement. They've given it a score of 8 from 22 votes. Not many comments here though. Very big comments, but not very many of them. Loved this game. It started as hideously hard, but when you get into it, it becomes massively rewarding. Made it through all 3 levels and then some way back as they're reversed. Oh, I didn't know that. Never reached parts of them. It's massive. I'd agree with that totally. Great gameplay and animation on the main sprite. Cool effects and brilliant music. Love this game, you're basically saying. Very fun shooter platform, good gameplay, a bit repetitive scenery and not excellent graphics, but lots of action. Again, I'd agree with that too. And another comment here, this is where they get the idea for Serious Sam. Well, I've never played that, so I wouldn't know. And then this review is quite huge, but let's go through it. Few talk about the massacre. You have to kill half the population of the world to complete this game. You have to follow the arrows to the end of the level, killing every moving thing you encounter. Excellent to kick off some frustration, but the game is very difficult. Levels are huge, graphics are okay, and the music is brilliant. Not a very good game, but you could be worse off in the shoot 'em up department. So slightly mixed comments, but overall, I mean, they're still giving it 7 out of 10 despite saying that. Unfortunately, there's no magazine reviews for this game. There's no ZZap review linked here, and I couldn't find any other magazine reviews either, so that's all we can do here is compare my score with Lemon's score, and they're pretty much identical. So let's move on to the next game I reviewed, which was Beam Rider, the re-release of the early Activision game. As you can see, this game originally released in 1984. I gave this a score of 7.1, and Lemon users have given it 7.6, so it rated it slightly higher than me, but pretty similar. From 80 votes, that's a lot of votes. So there's quite a lot of comments as well. Let's start at the bottom and work up for a change. So it says, this is a great Tempest clone. It's not a Tempest clone at all, really, is it? I suppose you could liken it to Tempest in a 2D sort of way, I suppose. While old and the graphics are old school, the play is great. This guy made it to level 45 and it took him 18 years. Wow, he played it for a long time. Here's another, never mind the graphics, here's the gameplay type of game. Excellent stuff. One of my most cherished cartridges. I dug it out the other day and it's still manically addictive. Pretty similar comments across the board here. I got a C64 monitor for free a couple of years ago. The first game me and my friend played was Beam Rider. Game is simple but very addictive. Truly old school arcade style game, requires good hand-eye coordination. After playing about 5 to 10 minutes, your brain leaves the equation. It's kind of pure reaction, like Tetris. Okay, one of the best shooters ever. So simple yet so addictive. I think we see a recurring theme here. Simple and addictive, says another comment. Graphics are simple but effective. Yeah, we get the idea. Lots of people mostly saying it's simple and addictive. So let's move on to the ZZap review from issue 27, and this is a review of the re-release. You can see there it was the 199 Firebird version, and they gave it a pretty disappointing, I would say, 51%. I think that's really underrating it. Obviously it's not a good looking game by the standards of 1987, but that doesn't mean it's a bad game. So let's go through the scores in a bit more detail. So presentation's got 63%. Pause and restart features no high score table. I guess that's fair enough. Graphics 38% simple but effective. I think 38% is a little bit harsh. 30% for the sound, no music and harsh spot effects. Again, probably a little bit mean to give it just 30% for the sound. I think they're really taking it by 1987 standards rather than the original 1984 ones. Hookability, simplistic and madly addictive. Where have we heard that before? Lastability, little variety. The level of difficulty is well graded and the pace increases with proficiency. Yep, that's fair enough, and that's what I would agree with. Lots of cheap blasting on offer, so good value. But yeah, overall I would say that's a slightly harsh review. Let's have a look at the comments here. So Julian Rignall says, I can't say I'm thrilled with this aging shoot 'em up. Basic graphics and white noise sound effects don't inspire, and the repetitive gameplay bores after a few sessions. Fast action, but shooting sprite after unimaginative sprite failed to spark any enthusiasm. Well, fair enough, Julian. I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one, I'm afraid. Another comment here, I can see why this was popular when it first came out on the 64, and I'm sure it will be in even more demand now it's at budget price. The basic concept is very simple, and that's what makes Beam Rider so addictive. This is a more complimentary review, I would say. Graphics update smoothly enough and give a perfect view of 3D perspective. Control is accurate and responsive. With budget price, there's no excuse for missing out on this old favourite. That's much more complimentary. Another positive one here, another of my early favourites gets new lease of life thanks to Firebird. Simple shoot 'em up with strong Space Invader overtones. Nothing to shout about graphically, starting to show its age but still very enjoyable. On later levels the action becomes chaotic and really gets the adrenaline pumping. I remember saying that about the sound doing that, making this a worthy addition to anyone's blasting collection. So overall it seems like more positive reviewer comments than the overall score, I would say. Nice little graphic there drawn by the illustrator as well of the spaceship on the beams. Moving on then, and next up is Antyriad, as I reviewed it as. Full name Sacred Armour of Antyriad, of course, originally released by Palace Software before being re-released in the Silverbird packaging. I gave this a score of 7.7, and Lemon users are in close agreement again with a score of 7.5. 90 votes on this one. There's some real big votes on some of these games. They are considered some of the classics from the Commodore 64, to be fair, some of these games. So let's have a look at some of the comments again. There's going to be a lot of these, presumably. Yep, loads of them. Let's just have a quick skim through and see if we can find anything particularly relevant. I liked Antyriad, couldn't get very far in it though. In fact, I don't ever recall getting the flying suit. Watched a video a few months ago on YouTube and some dude speed played through the whole game in about 10 minutes. Well, I did get the suit at least when I played it. So moving on, decent if flawed. Can't imagine why anyone would compare this to Metroid on the NES. They're not at all alike. Let's not get on to, there's obviously some argument going on between whether this or Metroid is a better looking game here, so let's skip over those. Yeah, someone's really upset about the fact that someone thinks the NES version of Metroid is a better game. Still going on about that there. Let's move on. Gert here says Zap's review was a better read than the game was to play. Very well presented at first, but the suit is boring to use. A novel idea, a bit too easy. The ending was crap from memory, consisted of a scrolling message on your bar down the bottom, and that's it. Well, I never got that far, so I'll take the word for it. Let's move on. Lovely sprites and animation, but once you found the suit, the game didn't have much left to go. A little short-lived and very pleasing to look at and atmospheric with it. Nice looking game, but I think the gameplay let it down a bit. I remember the scrolling as being very smooth, but on playing the game recently I realised this is not the case. Each screen shudders into life when moving through the landscape, like a creaky old door opening and closing in a creepy old house on a hill in Transylvania. That's very detailed. Having said all that, it's not all that bad, and the tune at the beginning is simply fab. A great game. A remake has been made on the PC not long ago. Well, that was in 2004, so very long ago now. One of my favourite games. I could never finish it when I got to the top. Antyriad always went down and got stuck. Yeah, never got that far, so I don't really know. Fantastic game. Once you sussed out the best route through the map, the game was an absolute doddle. I forget what my fastest time was, but I could consistently beat it within 2 to 3 minutes. My friends and I had fun beating one another's times and sending them into Zap's scorelord. We got them printed too. So yeah, I did mention when I reviewed this that I think if you map it out, there's obviously a way to get through it without getting stuck like I did and getting stuck in the suit so you can't get out because of the radiation and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't play it enough to find that out, but I've played it enough to form an opinion about it, obviously. So I think we'll move on to the Zap review now, because I could be going through these Lemon comments forever. So it was originally reviewed in issue 20, December 1986. Wow, there's a strange... What is going on here? What is this all about? Is this something from the inlay or the packaging of the original game, perhaps? It's basically got some news reports from 2086. The backstory is that basically an apocalypse ends civilization, and then you're part of a resistance of some kind, I think. But yeah, I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, 2-page review here, very large screenshots and things like that, very detailed. In fact, is it a 3-page review? My god, it is a 3-page review. So let's get to the scores. First of all, they gave it 93% in the original release, a classy arcade adventure from Palace. You have to remember this follows on the heels of the 2 Cauldron games, which they also gave very high reviews, a little bit too high in my opinion too. So yeah, basically everything's got 90% or more. Presentation, graphics, sound, hookability, lastability, value. Slick programs at this price are few and far between. I'd definitely say that they're overrating it a little bit, especially if, like those Lemon comments said, you can complete the game in a matter of minutes. That's not really good value if it costs £10 or whatever. So let's have a look at the reviewer comments. Firstly, on playing Antyriad for the first time, I instantly fell in love with the graphics. Actually, it says I instantly fell in love with the graphics. Marks down for the typographer at this time. Here they seem more of an art form than simple set decoration for a game, and very atmospheric they are too. Palace really impressed me with their style, which is distinctive but not repetitive in the least. Antyriad seems to be the Cauldron concept of puzzles taken a few steps further to produce an excellent game. Great fun to play and satisfying to solve. Simply brilliant. And the second comment here, Antyriad is initially great fun to play, there's no doubt about that. It's a very professional program. Excellent presentation, graphics and sound are high quality. Love the expressions of the faces on the trees. I'm not sure about its lasting appeal. Antyriad is a lot easier to play than Cauldron or Cauldron 2, I'd agree with that. And I felt it lacked a certain something to make me want to keep playing. Still, if platforms and mapping are your thing, then you'll find Antyriad worth your while. So yeah, I think that's a more fair appraisal of it than the overall scores say. So let's skip back and look at good old Julian Rignall again. Really big comment here. The Sacred Armour of Antyriad is simply superb. There's no other word for it. Dan Malone's mini comic is brilliant and the storyline is extremely well thought out. Presumably that's what there's an excerpt from on the first page of this review. I wish Palace would produce a larger version of the comic with an expanded storyline. That would be great. Graphics are truly amazing. Just look at the statues and trees, for example. Incredible. Tal himself is another classic, beautifully animated and extremely well drawn. Disappointing thing about the graphics are some of the single colour sprites, which I did mention. Nevertheless, very well animated. Great sound. Film-like soundtrack on the title screen and some good spot effects during the game. Collect them up with quick reflexes and dexterity rather than the old grey master to solve any problems. Quite a few locations. A map is essential. If you're after a really slick and polished arcade adventure, then look no further than this. It's about the best around. Well, I don't agree with that. I think the gameplay is pretty limited in all honesty. It's not terrible by any means. I gave it a 6, but it wasn't as good as I was expecting. So yeah, Zap really went to town with a 3-page review, gave it a sizzler and really high scores, but I don't necessarily agree with those. I think they've overrated it a little bit there, and perhaps that shows a little bit in the later budget review, because the scores dropped a little bit to 91%, and it says the game is played as a flick screen platform game and very good it is too. A little bit hard. Sound is up to the usual Palace standard. The graphics are quite superb, having been drawn by a professional comic artist. Buy it. So nothing really about the gameplay at all there. It's just a little overview of the game and basically some comments about the sound and graphics, but obviously they still gave it a pretty good score, and once again that's a score I'll be using in my final comparison. Now the next thing I reviewed was the compilation 123, which features 3 games that I've already covered in previous review comparisons, so I'm going to skip over that for the time being, although I am going to mention it a little bit later, and move on to the final game for this video, which was Mission Genocide. I gave this a score of 5.6, and once again Lemon users pretty close with 5.1, only the 9 votes though. There's some comments here about the game being considered quite average on the Commodore 64, but it was originally created on the Amstrad CPC, and there are actually some quite clever programming techniques used, but that doesn't really mean anything to me, so I'm going to move on. So the next comment here says this is basically a sci-fi version of River Raid with an excellent soundtrack that doesn't really get going until level 3. It's got no soundtrack. I think this person was probably playing a cracked version, because I did play a cracked version of it myself that did have a soundtrack on it, so that was added later I think by a cracker and did make it slightly better, but that wasn't the original game, so let's not talk about that anymore. Someone here saying, why did you do this, Paul? You had so much to live up to. Confusion and Spin Dizzy. I'm presuming they're 2 games that the same programmer worked on, Paul Shirley. Finally, average shoot 'em up with okay graphics, no sound at all to mention. There are many better shoot 'em ups than this. I could agree with that totally. So let's move on to the Zap review. They gave it 66%, which again was pretty close to me. Half-page review here. And as you can see, it says a playable vertical shoot 'em up, but not as good as Warhawk, which it mimics, which I would agree with again. Warhawk was a much better game released by Firebird probably a year before this one. So going through the other scores here, presentation 68%, thoughtful icon display screen. Thoughtful icon display screen, how thoughtful, and a sense of humour throughout. Graphics 51%, badly coloured but adequately defined and smoothly animated. Yep, that's what I said. Sound 32, basic sound effects and nothing else. Again, I agree with that. Hookability 72%, easy to get into. Lastability 58%, plenty of nasties to destroy, but graphic changes are the only reflection of progress. So let's quickly move on to the reviewer comments. When Mission Genocide first loaded and I pressed the fire button to begin, a feeling of deja vu swept over me. The overall appearance of the game is very similar to Firebird's now aging budget shoot 'em up Warhawk. The original Firebird release was well received, partly due to the fact that vertically scrolling shoot 'em ups were the in thing at the time. These days this type of game has to have some really special quality to make it shine, and unfortunately Genocide doesn't quite have it. And again, the second reviewer here likened it to Warhawk as well. The blasting is as enjoyable as ever, and the add-on weapons make the game rather more compelling, but graphics and sound are pretty weak. Sprites and backdrops are garish enough to warrant inclusion as toilet graffiti, and the SID chip is left twiddling its digits as it lets off a few feeble laser peows and white noise explosions from time to time. For £2 though, you could get enough hours of enjoyment from this game to make it worth looking up. Well, I disagree with that because I didn't rate it highly enough to be worth the $1.99, but some of the comments are fair. Overall, like me, it sounds like they're just a bit bored of the same old vertical scrolling shoot 'em ups and have given it a score to match that feeling. So that's the last of the comparisons done. As always, let's finish things off by looking at the comparisons side by side between myself, Zap and Lemon. I've taken a couple of liberties here because there was no score for Combat Crazy from Zap. I've put it at the top because it's come at the top for the other two. And I've also put Graphic Editor at the bottom because that wasn't reviewed by Zap or Lemon, so I'm just basically discounting that from the list for this comparison. So let's have a quick look through them, and you can see it's pretty similar across the board. Combat Crazy, well, I've put it at the top for Zap, but I don't really know. It probably wouldn't have got as good a score as Antyriad, but let's just leave it there anyway. And it's the top for myself and Lemon. Antyriad top, or in the top 3 for all three. Beam Riders in the top 3 for myself and Lemon. That's the one that's quite low down for the Zap scores and a little bit of a miscarriage of justice, I would say. Dynamite Dan is a little bit all over the place. 1, 2, 3, by the way. I've put my score for it, but I've also put the average score of the 3 games that were in the compilation from Zap and also from Lemon. So you can see Zap, the average score was 53%, and for Lemon it was 5.7, so they rate it a bit lower than my 7.1. Down the bottom you've got Force 1 consistently across the bottom there. Mission Genocide also near the bottom for myself and Lemon. Swap places really with that and Beam Rider, and it's pretty much identical across the board. In particular, when you look at the Lemon scores, they're really almost exactly the same. You've got 8, 7.7 and 7.6, 7.1 and 7.5. There's really not much in it. So, and that really reflects also when you look at the average scores, because for the first time ever, I think, all the averages are very similar, although you have to take into account that Zap didn't review 2 of the things and Lemon didn't review 1 of them. But even so, my average is 6.49. Zap's average is 6.47 and Lemon's average is 6.43, which pretty much means we're in agreement across the board for the particular set of titles. That brings to an end this penultimate review comparison video. There will be one more for the remaining 8 games, 2 of which I still need to find. If you've got any thoughts about the reviews I've compared here and any thoughts about the scores that anyone's given any particular games, I would particularly pick out the Beam Rider one here from Zap as being a little bit anomalous, I would say. If you've got any thoughts about them, then please let me know in the video comments. I'll be back with another game review video in the near future. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you soon.